Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, devotees. Dandat pranams to all. We welcome all of you for the today's morning program, Nityam Bhagavatha Sevaya. And today we are very fortunate to have His Grace Sri Bhagavat Prabhu, and he will enlighten us on Srimad Bhagavata, 5th canto, chapter 4, verses 15 and 16. Over to you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Thank you very much, Prabhu, for the opportunity. Thank you, everyone, and I am happy to be amongst you after a long time. First of all, I seek blessings of all the assembled Vaishnavas before I speak whatever I have heard and read from Srila Prabhupada books and his disciples' lectures on these two verses. So before we begin, as usual, we'll start with prayers. Om Agnanatimirandasya Gnananjanasalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha. Sri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam. Vandeham Shri Guru Shiyuta Padakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavamsha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prishthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swamini Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatadeshatarine Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gauratvishe Namaha. He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Once again, I welcome everyone. So we will continue our discussion on the 5th canto, 4th chapter, verses number 15 and 16. I'll share the screen. Prabhu, can you see the screen? And is my audio fine?
Yes, Prabhu, everything is clear.
Yeah. Okay. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So we are reading from 4th chapter of 5th canto. So yesterday's was number 14. So today's verses are 15 and 16. So we'll read the verses and the translation. Yad yad shirshanyacharitam tat tat anuvartate lokaha. Yad yad shirshanyacharitam तत्तत् अनुवर्तते लोकः यद्यत् शीर्षण्याचरितं तत्तत् अनुवर्तते लोकः यद्यत् whatever शीर्षण्या by the leading personalities acharitam perform tat anuvartate follow lokah the people in general. Translation and purpose by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Translation: whatever action is performed by a great man, common men follow. But a similar verse is also found in Bhagavad Gita 3.21. It is essential for human society to have a section of men perfectly trained as qualified Brahmanas according to the instructions of Vedic knowledge. Those below the Brahmanical qualification, administrators, merchants, and workers, should take instructions from those ideal people who are considered to be intellectuals. In this way, everyone can be elevated to the highest transcendental position and be freed from material attachment. The material world is described by Lord Krishna himself as Dukhalayam Ashashvatam, a temporary place of misery. No one can stay here even if he makes a compromise with misery. One has to give up this body and accept another, which may not even be a human body. As soon as one gets a material body, he becomes Dehabrit or Dehi. In other words, he is subjected to all the material conditions. The leaders of society must be so ideal that by following them, one can be relieved from the clutches of material existence. Verse number 16. Yadyapi saviditam sakala dharmam brahmam gushyam brahmane darshita margena samadhibhir upayet janatam anushashasa. Yadyapi saviditam sakala dharmam brahmam gushyet brahmane darshita margena samadhibhir upayet janatam anushashasa. Yadyapi saviditam sakala dharmam brahmam guhyat brahmane darshita margena samadhibhir upayet janatam anushashasa. We'll read synonyms and also the translations and purport. Yadyapi, although swaviditam, known by him, sakala dharmam, which includes all different types of occupational duties. Brahmam, Vedic instructions. Guhyam, very confidential. Brahmanaihi, by the Brahmanas. Darshita Margena, by the path shown. Sama Adibihi, Sama Gama Titiksha, controlling the mind, controlling the senses, practicing tolerance, and so on. Upayaihi, by the means. Janata, the people in general. Anushashasa, he ruled over. Translation. Although Lord Rishabdev knew everything about confidential Vedic knowledge, which includes information about all types of occupational duties, he still maintained himself as a Kshatriya and followed the instructions of the Brahmanas as they related to mind control, sense control, tolerance, and so forth. Thus, he ruled the people according to the system of Varnashrama Dharma, which enjoins that the Brahmanas instruct the Kshatriyas and the Kshatriyas administer to the state through the Vaishyas and Sudras. Purport. Although Rishabdev knew all the Vedic instructions perfectly well, he nonetheless followed the instructions of the Brahmanas in order to perfectly maintain the social orders. The Brahmanas would give advice according to the Shastras, and all the other castes would follow. The word Brahma means perfect knowledge of all activities, and this knowledge is very confidentially described in the Vedic literatures. Men trained perfectly as Brahmana should know all Vedic literatures, and the benefit derived from this literature should be distributed to the general populace. The general populace should follow the perfect Brahmana. In this way, one can learn how to control the mind and the senses, and thus gradually advance to spiritual perfection. So, Hare Krishna. So, these two slokas will discuss in detail whatever I have heard from Prabhupada's books and other disciples of Prabhupada. So we are reading about this section wherein Rishabdev's exemplary qualities are described. So we see in most we have read up till fifth canto. The pattern generally, whenever great saintly kings, especially incarnations like Rishabdev, Prithu Maharaj, or even in empowered entities or blessed by the Lord, like Parikshit Maharaj or Yudhishthir, whenever the sections related to these kings have described, then generally the qualities are glorified, and uh, immediately the topic around how the leaders would rule and how they would follow the various religious principles that is mentioned in the Shastras is mentioned. And inevitably, Prabhupada would comment on how the leaders of the society to should behave and what should be the ideal characteristics and the activities or dynamics in the society. So similarly, we also see here in this section the Rishabdev, which is who is mentioned as incarnation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It's mentioned in this verse, like we read just now. So he said that he because being a incarnation of the God personality of Godhead, he is beyond or rather above the rules and regulations. But still, he followed the principles of Varnashrama Dharma. So in basically in the theme here is like in the previous verse we understood how he was though he had a family life, he would he would perform all religious activities to set an example as to how to develop the religion and economic well-being, and how to develop material pleasure, or how to enjoy material pleasure according to the rules of regulations, and finally elevate oneself to eternal life. So he, through his instructions and this behavior, he showed how people in general could remain as householders and at the same time perfect by following the principles. So this is what the ideal or the core idea behind Varnashrama Dharma. Following the Varnashrama Dharma is one need not leave any of their varnas or ashramas. So we know what the varnas and ashramas are. So they can follow that, and at the same time continue to do their duties without renouncing that. So this is a theme we see across Bhagavatam whenever such either empowered personalities or the Lord Himself come as the ruler of the world to establish dharma. So this is in line with what Krishna also says in Bhagavad Gita, right? So we know those two famous slokas, yada yada hi dharmasya. So glanir bhavati bharata. So whenever there is a decline in religion and increase in irreligion, I myself dissent, and of course either he dissents, or through his empowered representative, or through his books. So one of them happens, like either himself or his representatives, they dissent. So if we want to a little bit understand what is this dharma, so dharma is essentially because the dharma of every living entity, ultimate dharma is jivera swarupa hai krishna nityadas. So every living entity's ultimate occupation as such, or religion, whatever dharma, the word dharma connotates with respect to the context we are studying. So ultimately, the ultimate religion or the ultimate occupation is serving the Supreme Lord. So that when that dharma, or when the forgetfulness of that dharma happens, so Krishna himself appears here in the world, in the material world. We also see that great personalities like Brahma, they talk about what happens when one forgets one's dharma. So when Brahma, after he he's manifested from the navel of the lotus sprouting from the navel of the Supreme Lord, he did a lot of penance because he couldn't understand what was his purpose or who was he. So when he did a lot of penance, Krishna, when reveals through his heart all the Vedic knowledge, he offers praise, saying that when one is bereft of this dharma, or when doesn't understand this dharma, what happens? So basically, तवाद भयम द्रविण देह सुहृन् निमित्तम शोक स्पृह परिभवो विपुलश्च लोभः अव तवान् ममेति असद अवग्रह आर्ति मूलम यावन्नते अनिग्रहम अभयम प्रवृणित लोका. So he says, so just to understand from his perspective also, the people of this world are always upset or disturbed material anxieties, and hence they are always afraid, because once one deviates path of Brahma, what happens is there's always anxiety. There's always anxiety for what will happen, and there's as a result of that anxiety, there is fear, and people are in general in a distressed condition. So, as a natural consequence of that, people generally try to protect wealth or increase wealth, protect wealth, protect their own body, protect their near and dear ones, and develop their relations, hoping that that would be of great protection to them. And even while doing that, they're filled with lamentation and fear. So, and because this is all based on the perishable conception of me and my and mine, or me and mine, or whatever we could understand it as. So, because it is on the platform of asat, not truth, adharma, or rather in one way we can consider. So, as long as a living entity doesn't take shelter of your lotus feet, one is full of such anxiety. So that is simply put in a simple and succinct way. Lord Brahma puts forward the point that what happens when one doesn't follow dharma or deviates from the dharma. It could be the varnashrama dharma. So varnashrama dharma is actually on the material platform itself, right? So we have heard many times. So varna ashrama dharma, as in the 14th verse, like yesterday's verse also, it's mentioned the objective of varna ashrama dharma is to ensure general well-being, material well-being. But the Daivi Varnashrama Dharma, which basically talks about the ultimate principle, satisfying the Supreme Personality of Godhead Hari, is beyond the rules and regulations or the Vedic injunctions. It's when we say beyond, it's basically the objective is beyond the Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha, right? It's the prema to get pure love of Godhead. So one, when one deviates from that dharma, either the varnashrama dharma or Devi varnashrama dharma, the consequences are like what Brahma mentioned. One is always fearful and always in lamentation. So he can just to understand this aspect further. So he continues that not just that, he is also explaining the plight or the poor condition of the entities, because once we deviate from the path of dharma, there is actually no hope for us to kind of get rid of the cycle of birth and death. So as long as one doesn't follow dharma, one becomes conditioned to take a material body, and as a result, one is always tormented or always being tortured by hunger, thirst, severe cold, and diseases, and miserable conditions, and so on and so forth. So again, Brahma says all this arises from the single point that the conditioned souls, because the conditioned soul sees the body as the end and be and all, like we say, for sense enjoyment. The conditioned soul is unable to see the body as a platform to achieve higher things or to understand higher principles of existence. So as a result, one cannot get out of material miseries. So a simple point, which is what dharma is all about. So each varna and ashrama has a dharma, and ultimately that actually puts the living entity one step um, higher on, or rather one step higher from the bodily consciousness. So eventually, as the living entity progress through various varnas and ashramas, they will eventually attain the highest perfectional state. So even we see, we'll continue to see as this 14th chapter, fourth chapter rather, sorry, is going to conclude soon. In the fifth chapter, Rishabdev himself explains, like as we saw in this 15th verse, the theme of the 15th verse is whatever leading personalities or great men follow, the common men, or whatever the great men do, the common men follow. So we see as when he was part of the householder life, he set the standard of what should be done and how things should be done. And eventually, he as he retires from householder life, he he imparts or he teaches his sons what should be done. So as a result, we see the next chapter, fifth chapter, wherein the famous teachings of Rishabdev, starting with that point of uh, having accepted Nayam Deha Deho Deho Deha Bhajam Niloke Kashtan Kaman Arate Vidbujam Ye Tapo Divyam Putra Kayena Satvam Suddhe Yasmat Brahma Saukyam Dhanantam. So he, the very first teaching, the very first teaching he teaches his sons is, after having achieved this material body, which has been and material, even material body, the human form in the material body, which is very rare, one should not engage simply for sense gratification, because the sense gratification is also available for dogs and hogs that eat stool and pass their life on the streets. So one should rather engage in austerity, penance, and try to elevate one's consciousness to attain the divine position of devotional service. So, and this in this purified state itself, only one can achieve unlimited bliss. So, this is what even Rishabdev is also teaching, further teaches us, and says that the whole reason of not making efforts towards that direction is basically forgetfulness of one's identity, spiritual identity. So the reason again, because the conditioned soul is attracted towards sense gratification, and as a result becomes mad and completely becomes ignorant of the root cause of his misery. So so eventually, so we can conclude this point that the dharma is all about understanding one's spiritual identity and understanding that after taking the material body, we should be intelligent enough to involve in activities that upgrade us rather downgrade us. So further discussing a little bit on the point about uh, following or teaching by example, because that's what we see across Vedic literatures and also in our Guru Parampara and following right from Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So we just go back a little bit from Krishna's teaching. So Krishna in Bhagavad Gita says the similar things, right? Like Name Partha Asti Kartavyam. I don't have any obligations to be done, or I don't have any responsibilities in these three worlds. But I do this so that I don't set a wrong example. Rather, I set the right example. Otherwise, I don't need to do this. So Krishna doesn't need to even work for his maintenance, right? But he does that. He follows all the rules and regulations that are all the religious principles he follows to set as an example. Like, for example, we see that in Krishna Lila itself, he need not have to, he's just like it's mentioned, Rishabdev, for Rishabdev itself, who is an incarnation. So, what to speak about the the source itself. So Krishna being the source, he is the source of all knowledge. Vedeshta sarve ahameva vedyo, right? So he is the source of all Vedic knowledge, but still he goes to Sandipani Muni's ashram to as a Gurukula student, to learn from the Guru. So again, to set an example, and we later on also read understand from, or rather hear from Bhagavatam, right? When Krishna was as a householder in Dwarka, it's not like he had a lot of opulences. He would enjoy the opulences. Rather, he would lead a very austere life, like getting up early in the morning, way much before Brahma Muhurta time, freshening himself up, doing meditation, and then performing oblations and so on and so forth, giving charity to the Brahmanas. So this is all, again, the reason is to set the right example. Yeah, and of course, what Prabhupada was also mentioning in this purport is like there is a similar verse, and it's again a famous verse. Yad yad acharati shreshtas tad tad eva taro janaha sayat pramanam krute lokastadanumartate. So this is essentially the theme for today's two verses. One is following the dharma oneself. The leaders basically have to teach, set exemplary standards to responsible behavior, and teaching others by example. And what to teach is also mentioned here. It's the following the varnashrama dharma. So essentially, we hear many characteristics of a leader. Yes, but unless like morality or ethical, or maybe setting one goals for oneself, achieving those goals no matter whatever trying or circumstances one is in. So those are all general mundane principles, but actually the two we can consider, and because the reason we can consider as two basic and essential principles, because as we discussed in the starting of the discussion as well, like where these theme is very oftenly repeated, like, so the two basic principles for a leader is following varnashrama dharma, performing the duties responsibly, and setting standards so that others can be exemplary standards, so that to teach others, his or her followers through example. So unless these basic principles are present, one cannot be an effective leader. He can be a leader, but cannot really lead the people, like we often say, like the blind following the blind. So he can be a leader, but just a blind leader. He will not have the right vision. So that's why we know current context, the West is the best in the sense of the world. The Western countries are more technologically powerful today. But Prabhupada would always say, but they're blind. They're strong, but they are blind. But the East, which basically primarily India, the Vedic culture, is full of, can like Vagnana Timirandasya, can give us a direction. So like a torchlight of knowledge. But it's weak, relatively, contextually weak in the technological and in terms of the riches of parameters, in those two parameters. So the best combination is the lame man directing the strong man, and which is actually what the other verse we are talking about, wherein the Kshatriyas, or the Brahmanas rather, giving direction to Kshatriyas, and then the Kshatriyas governing the society through the help of Vaishnavas and Shudras. So we'll come to that point. We'll discuss a little bit in few minutes about this teaching by example, because something for us like a takeaway for today, because it is right there throughout our parampara. If you see, Mahaprabhu stressed this point, Apani Achari Prabhu Jivere Sikhaya. Like it is said that Mahaprabhu, he has taught to his followers through his achar, to his character and behavior. And Lord Chaitanya would always say that a teacher should behave properly before he begins teaching. So, and I think it's a well-known story. Just to reiterate this point, Like we know once a mother goes to a sadhu, like saying that her son is very fond of sweets, so she wants him to stop as it is not good for health. So she approaches a sadhu whom she thinks that he can give some instruction, or rather some tips and tricks, or some mental exercises that he could control his cravings. But the sadhu immediately says, okay, is it so? Like, you come back after certain time. The mother kind of gets surprised that why is it so? But when she goes back again, so then he says simply, stop eating sugar. It is not good for your health. Rather eat healthy items. So the mother gets confused. If the instruction was so simple, why couldn't be said the previous occasion itself, in the previous meeting itself? So the sadhu says that, yeah, I knew it, but I myself have a craving for it. So if I have to teach this person, I need to stop doing that. So in this span of time which I asked you to come back, I tried myself or practiced myself, stop eating, and then I'm saying the same to this person. So now that instruction is more emphatic, convincing, and potent. So otherwise, it would have been just a lip service. So that's why we see in our parampara, like we said, Mahaprabhu. So we know how he has followed his life, like a householder, and more than a householder in his sannyasi role, how he had set exemplary standards for a sannyasi. And of course, sannyasi, grihasthas, or again, it's all varnashrama dharma. But as a devotee, as a pure devotee, he had given us standards which, of course, we cannot even consider to imitate, forget imitating. So then, how sometimes, yes, the leaders, most of the time we hear exemplary leaders exhibiting exemplary standards. But those standards seems to be very difficult to follow. So how do we then really bridge that gap? So like Krishna says, that's where that guru or acharya comes into a picture. If you want perfect knowledge or perfect instructions, you must approach a guru, and guru means the representative of the supreme personality of Godhead. So acharyam mam vijaniyam nava manyeta karichit. So Krishna says his acharya is nothing but he's my perfect representative. So he won't speak anything nonsense. So he, according to time, place, circumstances, he will give the same the essence of same standards that was observed by various great leaders and incarnations of the supreme personality of Godhead and the supreme personality of Godhead himself. Whatever exemplary standards they had set, the essence of the same standard, the guru then imparts to their disciples according to the time, place, and circumstances. So acharya means one who knows the shastra and how to practically use in his life, and the same thing he teaches to his disciples. So essentially, that is what brahmana is what all about. So that's why brahmana, one should listen to brahmana, and why he's considered intellectual, which was mentioned in the 16th verse, because he's brahman, he knows everything that is mentioned in the Vedic knowledge, not just theoretically, how to put it in practice. So because he spends all of his time in this, he must be taken care of by the other sections in the society. So he knows the essence of the shastras and how to put it in practice. Knowing is one thing, but ultimately, like we see, like we also talked about, how to put it in, the standards are quite high. So how to put it in practice is what guru or acharya comes and talks about. So this is what we talked about in brief for this verse. So just to go a little bit deeper, like since we talked about Mahaprabhu, I just talked of related to this theme of teaching by example, and also our parampara is there. So exalted personalities are there, right from the six Goswamis, Sanatana Goswami and Rupa Goswami. So they all set some standards. When we see the standards, like sometimes it's like very difficult to even think about it. but there will be one aspect that we can see, that we can easily follow. Like Rupa and Sanatana Goswami, they gave up all their power, riches to live as mendicants, and um, Sanatana Goswami in particular would actually he would circumambulate Govardhan hill, and he would do the long parikrama every day, and he would bow down to everyone whom he met, considering everyone as a Vaishnava. So like that he would do even in his old age. He would try to do it, but when Krishna, as Madan Mohan, saw that it was getting very difficult, but still he was not giving up. So he appeared to him and asked him to stop. But Krishna, Sanatana Goswami says, "No, how can I stop that? It's my vow." So we can see how they have set an example of following their vows. So yes, we maybe not at that standard, so we can definitely take that as an inspiration to see. We have, most of us have taken or will be eventually soon taking up vows of initiation. So how do we practice or uphold the standards of these vows? So it's in whatever trying circumstances we are put. So likewise, we see even in the case of Bhaktivinoda Thakur also. He was a grihastha. We've heard many times. Of course, even to read and understand also, it's very mind-boggling to understand his schedule, what time he slept, what time he woke up, what he would do. But yeah, maybe at a, at a at an immediate at a one-to-one comparison, it's definitely not possible because they're all empowered representatives. But what we see is in their life, they would not waste time in anything other than Krishna consciousness. So that's one thing that we could take as a standard. As an example, and take it as an inspiration, and through, because they are not wasting any time, because Krishna is time, it looks like as if Krishna expands, and they would, as for them as time, and they would have all the time in the world, because including myself, general complaint is we lack time. But once we focus all our efforts and energy for Krishna, so Krishna being time, automatically the time will adjust for whatever activities of priority that we need to accomplish on a daily basis. So likewise, of course, since we talked about many Vaishnavas, so even Prabhupada had set exemplary standards with his activities. But yeah, I mean, there are many things, but just to contemplate his determination to serve his guru. Like he would always say, I didn't know anything about writing, but just because my spiritual master told me to spread Lord Krishna's glories in English. So this is what I tried to do. So I put my best effort in trying to do that, and what did so essentially his example that we could take is following the instructions of his guru. Take simple instruction. It sounds simple, but of course, a lot of depth in that. Distribute, write books and distribute. Right, that's what at the banks of Radha Kunda, Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur instructed Srila Prabhupada. So we see that definitely the lifetime in preparation. That book definitely it is such a moving volume, wherein Prabhupada in the heat of Delhi, after publishing BTJ magazines, he would go around distributing himself. Today there are many of his soldiers, but at that time he would go around distributing himself, and in that heat stroke, he once even faints, and someone sees him and, of course, helps him. So basically, we see the extent to which the great personalities have strived to set the exemplary standards and taught others by their own examples. So we conclude this. So in last few 10 minutes, we'll understand the other point that is being mentioned, Varnashrama Dharma, and the Brahmanas especially, the Brahmanical culture and the Brahmanical potency. So Prabhupada, something which often we talked about, Prabhupada talked about, and we often heard also how Prabhupada wanted to establish the Devi Varnashrama, because that's one thing he thought he wanted to, but couldn't establish because Krishna had other plans for him. Even we heard this in Lilamrita, right? During his final pastimes, when he was very weak, but still he wanted to go to America, but he could go only halfway. He goes only till London. And in Bhakti Vedanta Madden, he inquires about how things are going on in the West. Um, West meaning especially because major of the activities were there. So he would say at that point he would say, "I want to live longer." So all the devotees, all the disciples around him become very they become elated because something, because Krishna earlier Prabhupada would say whatever Krishna's plan is, he will submit to it. But here he is clearly expressing his desire to live longer, which may be manifested through Krishna's blessings. That was their hope. But his point was, uh, I have done everything. I have written books. I have established temples. But there's one thing which I would like to do so that things will be much more perfect in the society, in this society, which is establishing this Daivi Varnashrama. So this is something he really considered as a vehicle or a platform wherein automatically everything will move in a methodical or a systematic format fashion, because as we also talked about, this whole concept of varnashrama is how one cooperates with one another, how one um, how one's strengths, how one can take advantage of one's strengths, and um, basically give and take. Um, one section of people have particular strengths, other section of people have another strength. So how one can do basically, simply put, a symbiotic relationship, which is basically designed by the God himself. So hence in this symbiotic relationship, the whole point, like just to one point wanted to also share was, um, there are three types of life. So one is an animal life in human body, and then the human life in human body, and the spiritual life in human body. It's basically like three categories or three states of consciousness. So this whole aspect of this varnashrama dharma is to bring the soul into at least the middle state, to at least the middle state, and from there on elevate to the third state, which is basically the spiritual life in human body. And that's what we have also seen in Rishabh Dev's life, and the explanation in the verses of Rishabh explain the glories of Rishabh Dev. So essentially, in this system, the Brahmanas are considered the focal or the crux, because the head of this system, as we also talked about, they give basically the Brahmanas are, as Krishna says in 18th chapter, Brahmana Kshatriya Visham Shudranam Cha Parantapa Karmani Pravibhaktani Swabhava Prabhave Gune. So they are divided based on the nature acquired. So nature is naturally acquired through because through birth we have certain nature, but it doesn't mean that the nature remains same. It has to be nurtured and further improved. So according to essentially the Brahmanas are a section of men who are perfectly trained according to the Vedic knowledge. So, and then because they have this perfect knowledge, they can see the perfect have the perfect vision, and just like we discussed earlier, they have the necessary ways and means to how to put that knowledge into practice. Hence, they train the Kshatriyas, and then they in turn rule the society. And the characteristics of Brahmanas are basically peacefulness. They're peaceful because they're essentially in the mode of goodness. The other sections are not in the mode of goodness. So we also hear from Bhagavad Gita 14th chapter, the primary or the main manifestation of the mode of goodness, or the result of mode of goodness, being in the mode of goodness, is being peaceful and happiness. So one immediately experiences happiness and bliss. So that's why we see, sometimes I used to also wonder, like especially in my earlier days, and now also I kind of see, when I see youth or their foreign devotees, what makes them get attracted to Krishna consciousness. So if you see the 6 characteristics of pure devotional service also, like Kleshagni, Shubhada, Moksha Laguta, Krit, Sudurlabha, Sandrananda Visheshatma, and Sri Krishna Akarshan. The first two are basically the moment one is introduced to devotional service, in especially in the line of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, one is put in the mode of goodness. So essentially that attracts, and that's why we see because when we see when people who have access to, especially the foreign body Vaishnavas who have access to so much of wealth and sense gratification, what attracts them, because it's the mode of goodness that's the bhakti promotes, or the pure devotional service promotes. So that's why peacefulness is a characteristic of Brahmana, because they are in the mode of goodness. And then self-control, austerity, purity, tolerance, these are all characteristics by which a Brahmana develops that nature. So in fact, Vaishnavism, being more Brahmanism, we are expected to develop all these automatically as a result of practicing, as a result of sadhana practice, this self-control, austerity, and all. And we also see Shabdev, that what guidance he's getting from the Brahmanas, because one aspect, he's supreme personality of God, he knows everything, but in the role of a king, what aspect he's getting in terms of seeing things from the perspective of as they are, and taking right judgments, things like that, which are essential for the leader. In this aspect, actually, there is one small incident or pastime in Mahabharata also, that highlights, Brahmanas are exalted and glorified, and they are in Vedas, they are told that they need to be respected. But as there is this famous movie dialogue also, great power comes great responsibilities. So Brahmanas have great power; they will yield greater power in the society, but with that comes also great responsibilities, because they have great power, they have great intellectual strength, they're respected, and they're supported by other systems. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that they exploit other. They have great responsibility. Like once in Mahabharata, once the Kauravas and Pandavas, they returned back from Gurukul. So there a case was presented, like a case study, like a practical internship, more like an internship. They are presented with a case, and they were supposed to give a judgment. So in the courtyard of Dhritarashtra, so there is a case presented wherein a murder was committed, and 4 culprits were found to be responsible. And it so happened that the 4 persons were from one from each of these communities: Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Sudra. So the task was to give the judgment. So Dhritarashtra asked Duryodhan. So Duryodhan immediately says they must be equally punished, because it's a case of a murder and it should not be tolerated. But when Dhritarashtra was about to pronounce the judgment, Vidura asks, "No, take advice. You also take not advice. Rather, this is we are asking these Gurukulis who have come to check their knowledge. You also check this check Yudhishthira's point of view." So Dhritarashtra, actually having that inclination to Duryodhan, he wanted to pronounce that, but okay, just paying with respect to Vidura, he asked Yudhishthira what his opinion. So then he says, yes, they have committed equally responsible for the culprit, but of the amongst all the 4, the Brahmana should be given the severest punishment, and then the other 3 in the little bit lower grades of punishment, or the severity is lowered, like Kshatriya little lower, Vaishnav much more lower, and Shudra the lowest. Because the Brahmana being the intellectual and being supposed to have exemplary qualities, so doing such an abominable activity is highly sinful. So he must be punished the most. And he must have stopped, or rather, yeah, he must have stopped and advised the other three from not doing, or he should have given the more insane advice rather than giving an insane advice in this case. So that's why we see the Brahmanas are all exalted. Yes, naturally, why? And because we have read through these points. But at the same time, there is, as we discussed, with great power comes great responsibility. So even in our case, as Gaudiya Vaishnavas from Brahmavad Gaudiya Sampradaya, we have a great spiritual power, potency in the line of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. We have access to something which probably no one had in the previous yugas. So we have the access to the highest mellows of devotional service, the prema bhakti, the love experienced by the gopis. We have access to that, but we also have the responsibility to uh, take it seriously and implement, and also to teach others. So yeah, so to conclude, what we talked about is here is and yeah, one more point I was just want to conclude with is, if you see Varnashrama Dharma is actually even a little bit in Bhagavad Gita, the Karma Yoga aspect, basically it's like little similar to Karma Yoga, how to do your duty. But in fifth chapter again, Krishna talks about Karma Sannyasa. But Prabhupada titles that chapter as Action in Krishna Consciousness. Why? Because you have Varnashrama Dharma, which we mentioned multiple times. It's on a material platform. So the Daivi Varnashrama Dharma, which basically are the fifth chapter of Bhagavad Gita, which talks about Karma Sannyasa, is giving up the prescribing, doing the prescribed duties, but giving up the anticipation or the expectation of that fruit of that duties. But Prabhupada titles, if you see in any other Bhagavad Gita, it's not titled like that. It's called Karma Sannyasa, fifth chapter. But in Prabhupada books, it is titled as Action in Krishna Consciousness, which is basically the 18th chapter Krishna talks about towards the end. But Prabhupada kind of doesn't want the secret, or doesn't want the nectar to be delayed, or the wealth to be held back. So that's what. So this all the points we talked about, Rishabh, is especially action in Krishna consciousness, life in devotion, or performing responsibilities without escaping. So this is what we get to learn from the great personalities, and we try to imbibe this in our lives. So that's essentially the point which we can conclude and take it as a takeaway. So I'll conclude here. So any corrections or any comments, please feel free to share. Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Hare Krishna, Raji. Thank you so much for the enlightening class that you mentioned about dharma of every living entity, Jivira, Swarupa, Krishna, Nityadas, and then you talked about whatever great men do, so they follow. That's why, like you have given the example of Lord Krishna, and here in the Rishabhadeva also, and you also said that like Sanskrit Krishna is available even in the non-human form. But so if we use the human form for the, I mean, if we endeavor in human form for sense gratification, it is the best of this opportunity, rare opportunity. And like you have given told that like how Lord Krishna also went to the school of Sandipana Muni, like for education, even though he's the source of everything, and everything came, all the Vedic knowledge came from him. And true leader, he gave three points: performing duties with responsibility, following Varnashrama Dharma, and setting the standards. And teaching by example, you have given like very nice examples of uh, Rupa Goswami, Lord Chaitanya, sorry, six Goswamis, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and our Parampara, how they're leading by examples. And you like while talking about the Varnashrama, you talked about the qualities of Brahmana and other things. And you said like we have access to the prema bhakti, which is not there in other yugas. So we have to practice sincerely and seriously and preach. So very nice project. Thank you so much. And there is one question from Gautama Gopinath Prabhu. I think he is asking about on behalf of all of us. So you want? Shall I read it out, Prabhuji? Or?
I read it, Prabhu. Yeah, I think actually Prabhuji is very humble in asking this question. Yes, as you rightly pointed out, he's asking this question as a contemplation on behalf of all of us. So yeah, I think in our case here, what we see the practice of devotional service is itself means of removing the anarthas. So we don't want to pull back ourselves because we have so much anarthas.
Just
But
one thing, Prabhuji. You can read out the question so that like whenever whoever listens class later.
okay, got it. So I have always had this dilemma. So Prabhuji is asking, I have always this dilemma: how much one eager to preach versus how much one qualified. Yet acharati. When I know I'm not qualified, still have lot of anarthas and not following all the angas of bhakti. When I know I'm not following, how do I preach what I don't follow? How to balance this? What is your view? At the same time, our movement is preaching movement, and we need to preach. Yeah, I was about to say that yes, it's a struggle for most of us that we hear many great things, but at the same time, when we see we are short of such great points or practices. But as we talked about this Varnashrama Dharma, the whole point of or not the essence, like we talked about, the essence of Varnashrama Dharma is acting oneself and in Krishna consciousness, and that same action kind of helps us become purified. Like even in the verse, it is talked about, I think the 14th or maybe in the 15th or 16th, where it talks about where one follows these rules and regulations and eventually attains the state of purification. So all one need to do is keep praying and definitely introspection and retrospection are two key tools that we need to all have, like at the end of the day or at the end of the week, or we recently started a new year, like just taking stock of where I am in my bhakti, what are the weaker points, whom should I approach, or what should I do to kind of get over these weak points. But I think the whole point is, I think what the Prabhupada's movement, like you said, a preaching movement, at the same time, there is an internal, Prabhupada's movement has both external aspect and internal aspect. The external is the preaching, but the internal is the way the Prabhupada given has our lifestyle, right from morning Mangalarti to night Shayanarti, right? So how much are we really following? How much is our level of chanting? What is our quality of chanting? So eventually all of this, like yat yat achariti stress, yat yat achariti, similar to that, that verse, like whatever we take one step and we Krishna takes several steps towards us, right? So ye athamam prapadyate. So we have to make that endeavor, and Krishna will bestow us with the mercy to reach him much more beyond than what we imagine. Sorry, my realizations are only that much that I could answer, but I think yeah, it's just like the actions in Krishna consciousness chapter, or the title Prabhupada gave, the action in Krishna consciousness. How much is our action is in what level of Krishna consciousness? Yeah, that introspection is one way I see we can balance. Yes, Prabhuji.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Sanksha Prabhu, you want to say something?
Yeah, I just want to add one comment. I think Gaurchandra Gopinath Prabhu may be knowing it very well. I had a lot of hesitation with respect to preaching in the past. So when I was asking my Siksha Guru, he told me two things. So preaching is not a privilege. It is actually a matter of service. Because when we preach, our mood should be in the service. And primarily, our mood is that I'm doing this preaching just for my own purification. We should not be attached to the result of the preaching, whereas if you are doing this as a matter of a service and whatever the anarthas that we have, because this is also considered as a devotional service, gradually the anarthas will get purified. So that's what he said, when he was having the hesitation, because as Gaurchandra Gopinath Prabhu rightly pointed out, he's much more advanced devotee, but I'm still in the lower rung. And this is what he told me. Actually, he encouraged me to do the preaching, because that process itself is purify you of anarthas, and it's a service. And the qualification, we as such, as Prabhuji has mentioned, we don't have any qualification on our own, but our respective spiritual masters have empowered us, and that's the only qualification we have, because we are in the line of parampara. So that's my thought process, Prabhuji. I thought of sharing it. Prabhuji may be knowing it very well, that I'm just repeating so that I repeat to myself.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Gaurchandra Prabhu, you want to say something?
No, Prabhu, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, brother. And other devotees, any questions or clarifications or comments?
Thank you, Sri Bhagavat Prabhu. It was a very nice class. I really liked the point which you mentioned, with respect to dharma, and finally how you connected that with our own sadhana. I think that will help us to purify. Thank you, Prabhuji.
Thank you for the opportunity.